Hello, and welcome to Universally Challenged, the podcast where we do cultural criticism from a biblical perspective. So sit back, relax, and prepare yourself to be challenged. Okay, so stepping away from theology a little bit, I thought we'd talk about some cultural things that are going on right now. From a biblical perspective, of course, as the man in the intro says. The Gallup poll has recently released, I think it came out in July, that 16% of Americans admit they smoke pot and only 11% say they smoke cigarettes. Well, what's your view on what does this say about our culture right now, and how do you think the Bible speaks to this? Is this even an issue?
I think it can be an issue.
Yeah.
Those numbers, I believe, represent a younger generation.
Mm-hmm.
I would assume. I don't know that for sure, but in my estimation, I believe our younger people have at least paid attention to education as far as when it comes to smoking. I mean, both of us are nurses, so you know the facts are present that cigarette smoke does tend to be in bodily form more harmful than marijuana. I mean, that's just research. It's proven that. Mm-hmm. But we do see these states now that have started to legalize use of marijuana. And I think that's kind of where the problem comes in.
Yeah.
I do see a definite difference between legalized alcohol and legalized marijuana. And I know I've known several pot smokers. I've smoked pot before.
Yeah.
I don't buy the argument that it's not a gateway drug. I think that's wrong. Now, don't get me wrong. Do I believe people just smoke pot? Yes. Okay. I don't think that the level of addiction is comparable to something more harmful or more potent. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, you can't deny the fact that getting into illicit drug use generally starts with something a little milder and works its way up. So that's kind of where I see it being a problem, especially with our younger generation.
Well, I would think part of the issue is something being legal doesn't speak to the morality of it. You can have things that are legal that are immoral. I think you'd have to think back to, is this immoral? Is it a sin? I know as like smoking cigarettes and stuff, I know as a kid they would say, yeah, smoking's bad. But, you could dip snuff, I guess, because everybody dips snuff. I don't know. I don't really know where the Bible speaks to that. And I think that's one of those things you determine for yourself. I don't really think of it as a sin. I think of it as something you do that's bad for you. It's not healthy. We know it causes cancer, all sorts of issues like that. But at the same time, I live in a glass house. I can't throw stones because I have blood sugar issues, and I probably just killed a soda last night. You know what I'm talking about? So I do things that are harmful for my body as well. And maybe some people would call that a sin, but it's nothing the Bible points out directly. It's not in the moral law, I don't think. Now, maybe somebody can make a link back to it and say, you're not honoring God because you're doing these things, but I'm not necessarily that legalistic where I'm going to go back and say that smoking cigarettes is a sin. But to each their own, and if you think it's a sin, don't do it because it's sinful for you if you do it. Now, as far as smoking pot goes, I do think that's probably a sinful act, simply because we know there's things that are permissible but not beneficial, but the Bible's very clear on drinking alcohol. Yes, you can have wine. It speaks. If you say somebody can't drink wine or beer, you haven't read the Bible, because it's mentioned a bunch of times. But it's very clear on you: do not drink, do not get drunk.
Right.
In no way does the Bible promote drunkenness, and it says drink but do not be drunk. Mm-hmm. You can do those things. And back then, of course, they had water issues and stuff, and it was better to drink the wine than sometimes the dirty water and stuff, I'm sure. As far as I know, never smoked pot. I never smoked anything because I'm an athlete, Scooter, and I still might get drafted one day.
Nice.
I'm
Remember me when you get your first paycheck.
Yeah. No, I'm in no danger of being drafted. But as a kid, I remember playing sports and stuff and thinking, I'd never do that. That's gonna mess me up. I've never smoked pot. I've never smoked a cigarette even, but from my understanding, you cannot smoke pot without altering your mind. So if the biblical principle is you can drink, but you can't alter your mind by being drunk, And that's a sinful action. I think it's a sinful action to smoke pot because you're going to alter your mind every time you smoke pot.
Yeah, and that's a good point. But I like the you saying you were an athlete or an athlete. In high school, I hung out with the jocks. Now I'm not a jock, but I was a very good basketball player. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of how I got into that group. Not because of size or anything like that.
Yeah.
But we would, smoke a joint, share a joint, and all they would do was work out. And I could never get that because, just 2 or 3 puffs, I had to lay down on a bench.
Oh.
And they're over there pumping iron. I'm like, what the heck?
I mean, let's admit it. A lot of professional athletes smoke pot. And I really never understood that because I'm like, it's still not good for you. I don't think, and I know there's arguments to be made for medical treatment and pain relief and things like that, but there's also other things you can take for that as well. I don't think any doctor is necessarily that's really knows what he's talking about is going to say it's healthy to smoke anything. So I think if you were to take the THC out of it and make a pill out of it, that would be better than to smoke it because it's in your lungs.
Well, they do have the oil now and stuff like that.
And for pain relief, I know people have made arguments that you've got cancer. This isn't as bad for you as addictive as some of these other pain meds. I get that because people don't realize how bad the other medicine is and how addictive it is. Because you can get addicted to that as well. But I still don't know about the mind-altering effect. I don't know if necessarily all pain meds alter your mind. I haven't done the research on that, and maybe it could be acceptable in that form. But as far as just people casually just are sitting around smoking pot all the time, I would look at it the same as someone's getting drunk all the time. At the same time, I'm not saying you go into someone's house who's getting drunk and arrest them.
Right.
So I don't necessarily fall on the side of somebody smoked pot, I need to throw them in jail. But I think it shows decline in society, though. I think ultimately it shows where our morals are now. I'm going to just make the statement. I don't think Christians should be partaking in smoking pot.
And that's a fair view. That's a fair view. It's a rational view. I will speak to, there are certain differences. Mm-hmm. So I'll play devil's advocate for just a moment.
Yeah.
There is a higher level of functionality in most people that smoke pot that are high as compared to somebody who's drunk.
They definitely drive slower than drunk.
But I've seen that. And you've probably seen it.
Yeah.
As well.
I worked in a trauma ICU unit.
Yes.
I've seen meth and pot was the least of most of the drugs I saw. But I think I'd much rather somebody smoking pot than doing meth.
Correct.
That's crazy stuff right there. But
that's that, and like you said, people are going to find ways to have a good time. But I don't know how to put it any other way.
Well, if you're just passing time and waiting to die, if that's all you're here for, that one day you're going to be put in the ground and that's going to be it, you might as well have as much fun as you can while you're here. But that's not ultimately, this is a temporary state that we're in. Eternity is where we're heading, and that's where we need to put our focus towards eternity, not towards satisfying ourselves here and getting it all while we're here, because this isn't what it's all about.
Yeah, and that's where it comes back to the issue of morality.
Yeah.
So I agree with you on that. That's really what it touches on. So if I was to say that there was a problem, that I would agree with you there, especially, like, I can't overstress the point that you see a lot. I wish they would have put an age on this. And we know Willie Nelson, people like that. Yeah. But I think you're seeing a rise in the younger generation. And we've somehow taken it just like smoking.
Yeah.
You got the warning labels and everything else. You know, you can't smoke here, you can't. But somehow society, we've kind of eased restrictions on, well, it's marijuana.
Yeah. Well, and see, one of my issues with pot as well is, like, if somebody gets into a car accident and they're drinking, well, you're going to know what their blood alcohol level was and whether they were drinking, recently. As if someone's smoking pot all the time, that you shouldn't be operating a vehicle. Somebody gets in an accident and kills somebody, and they were on something that altered their mind, it's tough to go back and tell, did they just smoke something? Did they smoke something yesterday or the day before? Were they clear-headed when it happened? I bet you, I've not looked up the statistics, but I bet you in areas where people are smoking pot all the time that there's more accidents and stuff happening. I know, working in a trauma unit for many years, a lot of accidents are drug related. A lot of them. A lot of bad decisions that were made. There's tons of drugs in people's systems. So I don't, but at the same time, I don't know if it should necessarily be illegal. There's just a lot of nuance there to work through. I don't really want people thrown in jail for it. I say morally it's wrong. I think it shows the moral decline of our civilization, that people are just trying to pass time while they're here, and they're not working with kingdom goals in mind, basically. But I don't know. I'm sure that's something we can come back in the future when we'll get some more stories on on what's going on in these states where they're legalizing it. I was recently sent to a conference in Las Vegas for my job, and it's legal there. And just while you're out there just walking around, kind of looking at what's going on, people are smoking pot all over the sides of the street. I do know there seem to be a lot of mental illness there in that area. A lot of homeless people that were freaking out on the side of the road that were somehow still smoking pot. I don't know where they're getting the money for that, but it was rampant for sure. I'm sure we'll see news stories in the future as to how that's affected those areas of the country, And I don't know if haven't done my research on this, but that even though it seems like a harmless drug, that a lot of people who are getting schizophrenia and they're hearing voices and hallucinations and having mental illness, a lot of it's starting with the use of pot, and it's actually triggering these things for people. Have you heard anything about that?
I have not heard any of that.
Okay.
But I certainly don't disagree with that being a probability anyway.
Yeah, and I don't want to speak out of something that I don't know for a fact. I've just heard that it can cause mental illness, basically, and that we're seeing a lot of mental illness these days, and they're saying a lot of it's contributed to the psychedelic use of pot that leads people there that wouldn't never have that mental illness without that. But that's something won't talk too much about because I don't know as much about it. But
I'd like to see the difference, if there is any, in the effects of people like in Colorado at a higher elevation above sea level. If there's?
I never thought about that. I didn't look up any of those stats. I know Colorado has a lot more homelessness and stuff now since they've legalized pot. People just move in there and they just live on the street and smoke pot. I don't know. In Vegas, those homeless people, they were well fed. People would come out of the restaurants for their food and give it to them. They just camp out anywhere. They could be right in front of the hotel at the door, got their stuff set up, leaning against the wall, and I guess they weren't calling anybody to move them out. It's just where they lived. I don't know. This is a PSA for anybody that wants to be homeless. Vegas is a pretty good spot to do it at. So anyway, we have now, Disney has announced, and it's caused a little bit of a commotion on the internet. It's they have a black Little Mermaid now.
Nice.
Yeah. You're good with Black Little Mermaid?
I'm good with Black Little Mermaid.
I'm good with Black Little Mermaid. She's fictitious. She doesn't exist. She can be whatever color she wants to be. Some people were pointing out that since she lives under the water, it doesn't make sense that she's black because she doesn't need the protection from the sun. And they were saying a lot of the underwater creatures, especially deep sea, are translucent. So therefore, translucent Little Mermaids, they say they're trans activists.
Is this part of the LGBTQA community, or what is this? You can be anything you want.
Yeah, I guess. So. I'm pretty sure that was tongue in cheek, whether the stuff they were saying there. But people got really upset about them making those remarks. But yeah, I don't care if the Little Mermaid's black. She's fake. My daughter's favorite Disney princess was Tiana, Princess and Frog. She loved Princess and the Frog. Never once thought, oh, you can't like Tiana because she's black. No, it doesn't matter. The story, she's a black person, whatever. Little Mermaid's fake. They did have an old version of the Little Mermaid, and it was a white character. Some people are upset simply because originally they were white and they're making them black. I don't have any problem with whatever race someone uses for a character, but I do think this is a little bit of let's erase white people. You can't have a good character that's white anymore. If you watch movies, it's very plain a lot of times. The white character is automatically the bad guy. It's easy to tell from the beginning. That they may not seem like it, but it's like, I know that person's the bad guy because they're a white person in the show. But they want to say people getting up in arms about the Little Mermaid changing to black is ridiculous, that they're being ridiculous racists, basically. But at the same time, they would be upset if you made a white version of Roots or a white version of Nelson. I'm doing Nelson Mandela's life. Brad Pitt's a great actor, and you know what? He does a spot on Nelson Mandela impersonation. Let's change it. Let's change it to Brad Pitt. They would freak out. Why? Because it's a real person.
Yeah.
And I kind of get that. I don't see any sense in taking a real historical person and playing them as a different race. But at the same time, the left does the same thing with Hamilton.
Yes.
It's ridiculous. And I tried watching it. Everybody talked about how great it was. Michelle Obama said it's the greatest work of art ever made. So I should have known at that point that it probably wasn't. I knew several people at work that had flown to Chicago or flown to New York to watch it. When it come to Dallas, people were going up to watch it. Tried to get my wife to watch it, and she was contrary to it, so we didn't go. But when it came on Disney Plus, I sat down to watch it, and it's about Alexander Hamilton, his life. It's straight music the whole time, which I wasn't really into. I only watched part of it. I did not finish this. But it's colonials, American Revolution, life of Alexander Hamilton, with no white people in it whatsoever. I talked to someone at work about it, and I'm like, what is going on here? That there's no white people in a show about the American Revolution, about the life of Alexander Hamilton. They say, oh, well, they're wanting to represent America as it really is. And I'm like, well, then it's 30-something% white people. So there should at least be 30% white people. But that doesn't matter because this is a point in history where it was mainly white people. That's who was here. But you can't say anything about it because you're being racist if you say something about it. But they want to pretend like white people don't exist in history. And one girl even told me that, we don't know if Alexander Hamilton was really white or not. It blew my mind. Eventually they'll be saying we don't know if he's a man or a woman.
Right.
Because he didn't tell us. Mm-hmm. And, so it really got me. I'm like, that was just a weird statement. I've never questioned whether Alexander Hamilton was white or not. I just assumed he was white. Maybe I'm the crazy one here, So I go back and look it up, and now his dad, they were from Scotland, like his mom's Irish or something. They're white people. But somebody just makes a statement like that, and you think, do I have to go back in history and start researching everybody's ancestry to assume, maybe George Washington wasn't white? If somebody makes that statement, I guess I've never looked it up. But yeah, at the end of the day, I don't really care what Disney does with their characters. If they'll do a black Little Mermaid that doesn't have all the woke things in it, I'll be fine. We'll watch it because I have a little child at home, and the problem is it's just a telltale sign whenever they do it. We've changed that character from white to black. They're showing that, hey, we're woke here. We realize we're trying to get more representation out there.
Yeah, this is nothing but a reflection of the socialism and the Marxism that's starting to take over our country. It's become dangerously prevalent now, and it worries me, especially when I think about my kids and my grandkids. I'm like you. A fictional story, a fairy tale, make it whatever you want. Just be true to the original story. That's kind of all I would ask. You could even do a gay version of The Little Mermaid if you wanted to. Just kind of at least be true to the overall theme of what goes on. I wouldn't have an issue. I probably wouldn't show it to my kids.
Yeah, but I'm not going to watch it.
But I'm just saying that's fine. But
I'm sure this probably is a gay version.
But
we haven't heard all the rest of the details.
When you start trying to erase our history, that's a whole different ball game.
Yeah,
right there, and that's what socialism wants to do.
Yeah,
it wants to take all the good and the bad out of what built this country and put their own narrative in it. They want to betray, I know, and we've said this before, I know I'm a white supremacist just because I'm male and I'm white and I'm Christian. So
for the record, Scooter is not a white supremacist.
Well, according to the woke, I am.
He's just saying that people would call him a white supremacist just because he's a white guy.
Yeah. And you see that, unfortunately, most of the people that have these point of views and have these ideas, they don't understand necessarily how they actually demean what we consider minorities in this country. They demean the contributions, not only that they made in the past, but what they continue to make. They actually lessen them. They lessen their value.
Yeah.
And those that buy into that don't understand that the main force, the main factor that drives this narrative are a bunch of rich white people.
Yeah.
So that's what scares me.
Yeah. But you're talking about Marxism where they're basically separating the people. And there's one bad group of people that's against everybody else, and they have and nobody else has, right? So they're trying to set up white people as being this group, and everybody else is against them. Basically, they're the bad people. They're the devil. Put the white face is the devil face, and you can go back through history and find evil things that white people have done for sure. And you can find evil things black people have done and that Japanese people have done and that, Native Americans have done. But it doesn't make all those groups evil. They're still if you omit every good thing that's ever been done by a white person, for every white person that was racist, there was a white person that gave their life to free black people from slavery at that time. If you omit all the good things, yes, you can totally paint a horrible picture of any group of people. Mm-hmm. And you can do the same thing with other races, but I'm not going to because I'm not that brave. No, not. No, you don't. Like you said, I'm already racist because I'm a white person, right. And people assume that, and so as a white person, you're not allowed to say certain things, which is racist. I can't express thoughts because of the color of my skin is a racist thing, for sure.
It's just another example of using your own intolerance to preach tolerance to other people, and that's just wrong.
Yeah.
Thanks to the internet and other means of media transmission, we have a large group of minorities that don't buy into this crap.
Oh yeah,
there's always going to be ding dongs, no matter what your color is. And I'm glad to see that how vocal that they have become over the last couple of years. I think it's even more now than it was, say, 8 or 9 years ago when this stuff really started to kind of kick off.
End of the day, cool. I'm cool with the Black Little Mermaid. I'm cool with black elves on Lord of the Rings. It's all fine. They're all fictional characters, no big deal. I'm not cool with going back in history and taking something that happened in Victorian England and pretending like half the nobility are black people and half the, or Hispanic or something, because it's just not true to the time and the event. Right. Same way if they went back and did Shaka Zulu and you had half the tribe was white people, it doesn't even make sense. And whatever. I think we need to move on from this topic right here. The something that had been in the news probably fairly recently is that there was a Christian school in California that plays football, and one of the other Christian schools in the division has a couple of girls on the team. So this school doesn't think it's right to play against females because they say there's a certain way that Christian men should treat women, and that's not one of them on the football field. So they want to forfeit, or they want to not play that game, which means they would forfeit and lose. Mm-hmm. But it's not good enough for like the mom of the girls on the other team. She wants to sue them to make them play the football game.
It's a weird case, and I don't have a whole lot of thoughts on it. What I will say is something that we've talked about before. Mm-hmm. Apparently, this all came about after the game. A girl took her helmet off, and the opposing team made gestures or comments or something. I don't know, smirks. Well, mm-hmm. Apparently, the lawsuit starts out with this was just humiliation for this young lady. And I told you I would, but I'm sorry I failed. I wanted to see a defense argument from on the side of the school yet, but I haven't looked that up. I will say this: the one thing that will get this particular school in trouble or may wind up hurting them monetarily is the fact that during the COVID crisis, they accepted federal money in the form of the payroll protection plan that President Trump put into circulation in the spring of 2020. Mm-hmm. So I don't necessarily have a problem with any school, a Christian school, private school, enforcing its constitutional bylaws and things of that nature, especially if it comes from a biblical standpoint, I can understand the difference, not in value, but in function of the male and female and how they're to be treated. However, when it comes down to it, if you're taking federal money, you've opened yourself up to things like Title IX bylaws and such as that. So I'm not quite sure what this is going to do as far as the school is concerned and this lawsuit.
Yeah, and I don't know if there's anything biblically as far as girls playing football, because football's not mentioned in the Bible. You got to kind of base it on biblical principles and what we do have different roles as men and women for sure. I feel like I played football in school, and it's kind of a team sport. It allows men to rely on other men. To me, it's almost a prep for like going into the military or something. You know, you have to work together. You all have different roles. You rely on each other. You win together, because there is no team that's going to win there's no person that's going to win on their own in football, and you lose together. You know, and I think there's a lot of lessons in life to learn from playing football. Is it only something guys can learn? I don't know. I think it almost gets that same argument, should women be in the military? You know, it's almost the same thing. And as society, we've determined that women are in the military, whether that's a biblical principle or not. I don't know. I mean, you were in the military. What's your thoughts on?
Well, when I was in there, they couldn't be in a combat role.
Yeah.
And now even that's changed.
Yeah.
So I'm like you. This would actually be something that I would have to sit down from a biblical perspective. And I've never studied in the Bible, never looked for it in the Bible.
Yeah.
So it's hard for me to give an answer on whether I think the school in this case would be right from a biblical standpoint. I do think that the majority of people would lean towards saying, you know, I don't want my girls playing football. I don't want girls on the football.
Yeah.
And a lot of that has a different connotation. And there may be a little chauvinism in some of that. I'm sure there is, even from my standpoint. However, I don't know, Zach. I mean, it's tough to answer. And from the military, you know, I believe if the female proves herself worthy enough to get out there and do it, then let her do it.
If she makes it by the same standards.
Same standards, absolutely.
I've seen videos before where like drill sergeants and the guy's running at the back and he's stumbling and stuff, and he's behind everybody, and you got 2 or 3 drill sergeants in his face, and they're just barking at him. He's trying to keep going, and they're yelling at him, they're getting him, because they know that he's substandard right now, and you can't have that, you know, so they're going to try to get him to that standard. And then I've seen it where the woman's pulling up the tail end of it, and she's really having a hard time, and they're back there encouraging her, come on, you can make it, and things like that. So they're treating them different. I think if you have the same standard for the man and the women, and the woman can do it, then okay. I don't necessarily think that that's a biblical role for women to be going to war. I don't know how many times you ever saw it in the Bible, or if that's what was intended. But I think as long as they can meet that standard, they can be out there. As far as the football goes, I would be tempted to be like, okay, let's just play the game. You know, if they shouldn't be out there, you know, they're going to get hurt probably, but just play the game. But if the school has a conviction that they feel like from the Bible's telling them we can't go out here because these girls are out here and we don't want our boys treating girls like that. I mean, society now is really big on men not abusing women, which I don't agree with men abusing women at all. But at the same time, they want to put them in a situation where a guy could hurt a girl. And it might teach them, well, she's just like a man. If a man got in my face and was yelling at me, I might smack him. Well, I might start smacking girls too, you know. And to me, it does put them in a weird situation. But at the same time, I think they should just let the team forfeit and take the loss. Humiliation, you're going to sue somebody because they gave you a look that you didn't like. I mean, that's all day long, every day, man.
And talking about having a girl out there, you have a whole different set of logistical problems and things that can happen. The girl wants to play football, that's fine, but the first time she gets clocked, you know, and a parent jumps up and say, well, you can't hit her like,
exactly.
Why not? Why not? Now, how do we dress? How do we perform? What is the locker room situation?
Yeah.
If you're in a scrum, you play football. I didn't. You know it gets down and dirty in a pile.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we're grabbing, we're punching, we're feeling. Now you've opened up a Pandora's box just by introducing the opposite sex into a scenario like that.
And it's in high school, people probably would try to be grabbing and stuff.
Because I think hormones are a problem at that age, aren't they?
Yeah. Toxic masculinity kicks in. A sinful nature in man is what it is. And the problem with a lot of these issues with men and women in things together is people leave out the fact that we are sinful creatures. They want to put men and women in inappropriate situations together and then complain when the guy acts inappropriately.
Right.
That's his base nature. They forget that we're sinful, and this is how we act, and that's why we separate in certain situations. Whatever. I don't want to get off into the men and women's bathrooms type thing. That's something. Like I say many times, that's a podcast to itself, because you can talk about that one for a while. So I'll stay away from that. But ultimately, I think that Christian schools need to stay away from taking government money, because then you're not held accountable for some of these things. I feel bad for the kids for not being able to play the game. If you do have a conviction that this is wrong, though, I don't think you can go through with the game. If you're saying that the Bible says this is wrong, you have your reasons for it, then don't do it. That's the way I look at it, and the other team should go ahead and just take it as loss. Heck, if I was a coach on the other teams, I'd probably find a girl to pop on my team the week we were playing them. If you're really, that's probably not the nicest thing to do. But if you need a win real bad, get a girl on your team that week, and they'll forfeit that week. But whatever. But sticking with Christian schools here, so there was another private school that had a kindergartner that was enrolled in their school, and they found out later on, after she'd been there for a little while, that her mom had another mom. She had two moms, basically. Right. I mean, not literally, but her mom was married to another woman, basically. And that was part of their school charter, was that they didn't agree with homosexual marriage, and everybody had to sign it, saying that they agreed that marriage, or that sexual relationships only took place between a man and woman in a marriage context, is my understanding of what the contract was. And they found out this girl had two moms and kicked the girl out of the school. Well, the moms weren't happy about it, and they're suing the school, basically. And a lot of this has to do with the school taking government money, the same as what we were talking about during COVID. And so they're saying because of that, they're going to be able to hold to the same standards that, like, non-private schools are held to.
Yeah, and this situation is more cut and dry as far as my support for the school, because whether you believe in the Bible or not, you just taking it by its word, you can't disagree with the school.
Yeah,
you can't disagree with its bylaws. Apparently, somewhere at some point in time, this child's biological mother, maybe the divorced father, could have been involved in it. I don't know, but they did not answer truthfully did not act truthfully when they enrolled her in the school. School found out about it, and they did exactly what the bylaws said they should do, which was, you can't go to school here because your parents or your two mothers are involved in this illicit relationship.
Yeah.
Now, once again, same set of circumstances as a school before. What's going to get this particular private school in trouble is accepting federal money. Now, I can't have more of a problem with that than I did with the other school. I'm just saying I would be more adamant, at least as far as the actions of this particular school. Because in this case, like I said, it's cut and dry. The school is absolutely correct and operating under something that they've already had established.
Yeah. And I do think they have the right to do that. The Bible's clear on homosexuality, that it doesn't agree with it. It says it's sinful. As we've talked about before, it's not the only inappropriate sexual relationship. They're saying sex is only, or sexual relationship is only good within a marriage context, which is what the Bible supports.
Correct.
For sure. I know people go back and look at polygamy in the Old Testament, and they're going to say, well, look at these polygamous relationships. Look at some of the things that happened with some of the people in the Old Testament where they brought in concubines and things like that. that is historical fact, but that's not what the Bible does not support. That all those things led to issues. You got Ishmael and Isaac. Anytime that happens, it never brought good things to the house. And those were not things that were prescribed by the Bible. Those were things that were described by the Bible that happened. Jesus said he made them male and female. He determined what a marriage was, and it was a man and a woman. And within that context, everything's better. Anytime it's outside of that, things were always bad. You can look at David and Absalom. There's all down throughout the Bible. That's not a good thing. So it's not only wrong to have a homosexual relationship, it's wrong to have any relationship out of the context of marriage like that, okay? The same time, as Christians, we love people that are in those different relationships. We love homosexuals, as people, and everybody needs Jesus, and that's what we shoot for. We've talked about this before. We've talked about all this before because, as I've mentioned before, Zach erased 2 of our podcasts, and we're trying to redo them right now. But and Zach's my producer. It's not me. It's not who I'm talking about here, so we'll blame him. The difference between a homosexual relationship and a man and a woman's sexual relationship outside of marriage is that one is appropriate in the right context and the other one's never appropriate, right? So, a lot of Christians today, I guarantee you go into your church, you've got couples that are not married that are living as man and wife. Yes. You've got plenty of Christians nowadays that societally, it's acceptable, so they're doing that. Even though it's not correct, we know it can be appropriate if they get married, and homosexuality is never appropriate. Right. So, yeah.
Right. And by the way, we're not supporting the relationships that Zach was talking about. We're not supporting it, but he does make the interesting point that in the proper context, that's totally biblically acceptable in the eyes of God, whereas the homosexual union is not. Never at all.
And I don't know if the school, like we were talking about earlier before we started, I don't know. I'm pretty sure in the charter it says that it's only appropriate man-woman marriage context. Do they have kids in the school whose parents aren't married that are man and woman?
See, I don't know. I would like to find out because I told you earlier that I would support the school if they came out and that was their goal. Yeah. So if you wanted to go through and...
That is so tough too. And then you'd have to think, people get divorced and stuff. But of course, I guess you could be divorced and still not be in an inappropriate relationship. But I get it. My main pull from this story is that a private school, a private business, or whatever should be able to set their own standards. And they've determined this is a biblical standard that they're going to go by. They should be able to execute it, right?
I agree.
And I feel bad for the little girl because I don't know what the other schools around her are like. I don't know. Maybe this is the only good school. Maybe that's why they did it. I think it was wrong on all sides. And the women who signed the girl up knew whenever they signed the paperwork that the school didn't agree with what they were doing and that they weren't supposed to be enrolling her there, and they did it anyway. But I think it was wrong of the school to take the government money because their money's never free. They're all about control, and I honestly think I would try to figure out a way to give them their money back. Stay out of my business. I'll get you the money back, but I don't think they're going to let it go. I think they've got a chance to get them because of this, and this. I don't know how this all ends. Do you know? It's Supreme Court.
Well. Fortunately, in July, the Supreme Court has passed a ruling that allows private entities, private institutions of education, of higher learning, and so on and so forth, to apply for and receive state funds. So you have that avenue. But once again, we're talking about state law and state monies versus federal law, and I agree with you. I fully support the school and what they're doing. But you need to keep your hands out of government money, federal government money.
Yeah.
Because you talked about polygamy. It's never a good thing. There's nothing free. The government, our federal government never gives anything away.
No. You're right. They take our money, give it to people, and then hold them accountable to their standards.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening and supporting our podcast. And until next time, keep styling and profiling. UCcast